prepared by Jessam Lamoxo.
Hello everyone, by the way, I am Jessa M. Lumukso, your discussant for today. But before we start our discussion this morning, so let's have a brief definition of our lesson this morning. So today we will be learning together about assessment of learning. So assessment of learning. So we will discuss that for that. So assessment of learning. So when we say what can you hear or what can you have an idea or what comes into your mind when we say assessment of learning? So when we say assessment of learning, it is a key concept in education. So it's important to differentiate it from other form of assessment. So in that we can hear so here's a breakdown of assessment of learning. So I have a question. What is assessment of learning? So when we say assessment of learning, it is a what is this purpose? So it is a summative purpose. So it is a assessment of learning is a primarily summative. So this means it's designed to provide a summary of what what students learn, of what students have learned at a specific ideas at a specific point in time. So it's used to make a judgments of the students. The teachers use it about students' work, students' achievements, students' achievements against established standards or benchmarks. So the first thing we need to timing. So it typically occurs at the end of the quarter or unit or course, semester, or even school year. So also it has we need to have a focus. So when we say focused, the focus is on evaluation, evaluating students learning. So it is the focus of evaluating students learning outcomes. So it answers the question that um, what have students what have students learned? So if it means that example. So example for that have final exams. When you say final exams or even standardized test, of course, assessment of learning, we have to determine what have the students learned in that certain quarter or student semester. So of course the end of unit or of projects. Of course, in the students' assessment of learning, we have the final portfolios. Uh, of course, if that's the case, so the key characteristics of assessment of learning, so it provides evidence of students' achievements. Of course, as a teacher, it is the way of assessing the students' achievements and used for grading, reporting, and certification. So, as a teacher, it is very important to have that kind of assessment for the students in order to have a good learning for the students. It helps also determine whether the students have met the learning goals. Of course, as a teacher, it is our duty to meet the learning goals of the students. Relationship other assessments. Of course, it gives assessment for that kind of assessment. It helps also to understand how assessment of learning to relates to the other form of assessment. So assessment type. So another thing that we need to discuss about assessment for learning. So let's move on to assessment of learning relates to other assessment types. So let's relate to move on to assessment for learning. So assessment for learning is a formative assessment. When we say a formative assessment, this is ongoing assessment used to monitor the progress of the students. So and also it is the duty of the teacher to adjust instructions. It happens during the learning process. So of course it also answers the question, so how how can we improve student learning? So how, as a teacher, how can you improve students learning? So as a teacher, assessment as learning, so we need used to assessment as learning. So this involves students actively participating in their own assessment. In other ways, students reflect on their learning. So other way that they're learning and use feedback to improve their learning. So it also promotes metacognitive metacognition. So in essence, so assessment of learning measures what students have learned. So it is way that let's move on to assess. When we say assessment of learning, it is helps students learn. So when we say that a students learning, so when we say assessment as learning, so it helps students learns how to learn. So students how to learn. So another way we have to be that the types of assessment kinds of assessment when discussing assessment of learning. So it's crucial to distinguish it from assessment for learning. So why? So here's a breakdown. So assessment of learning is purposed. It's a primary summative, meaning that it aims to evaluate. Yes, of course, as a teacher we need to evaluate the of progress or learning at a specific point in time. So it also focuses on determining what what students learn or what students have already learned. So it often in relation to establish standards or benchmarks. So it also used to provide evidence. Of course, as a teacher, it is the evidence of achievement for reporting purposes. For example, like for instance, grades, report cards. Of course, as a teacher, it is your duty to have that kind of reporting or kind of that assessment. So characteristics. So the characteristics so typically occurs at the end of the unit terms or course. So example include final exams, standardized tests, and culminating projects. So that's the characteristics. So it provides a snapshot of students' achievement. So it is where we can get that kind of achievements of the students. So K uses, so reporting students' progress to parents, administrators, and other stakeholders, and also stakeholders. So making decisions about students' placements. Of course, as that kind of also the promotion. Yes, of course, it's given to at that point. Evaluating the effectiveness of instructional program. So let's move on to the key differences to assessments of for learning. So assessment for learning is formative. Of course, as I mentioned earlier, that for learning is a formative, meaning it is used during the learning process to inform teaching and learning. So it is used to adjust, of course, adjust teaching. So to better meet the needs of the course as needs of the students. When we say assessment of learning it is a summative. It happens after the learning has taken place. So this essence of assessments of learning measures what what the students learned, or what the students have learned. So I guess everyone that needs to that learned. So while assessment for learning guides the learning process of the students, or process itself. So one point for the competencies of assessment for learning 1.4 demonstrates skills in interpreting assessment results to improve learning. 1.5 comprehend and apply basic concepts of statistics in educational assessment and also evaluation. 1.6 demonstrate knowledge and providing timely, accurate, and constructive feedback, feedback to learners and parents. So, absolutely, let's break down each of these points in the context of educational assessment. So, the first one is 1.4. So 1.4, it demonstrates skills in interpreting assessment results to improve learning. So this involves more than just looking at raw scores. So it's about analyzing. So when it's analyzing data, so looking for patterns and trends in students' performance. So second, identifying areas of strength and weaknesses. So for weaknesses for individual students and the class as a whole. So yes. So it also understanding the distribution of scores. Like for example, are they clustered or spread out? So example, drawing or interferences. So determining determining what this assessment results. So actually results actually mean in terms of students understanding. So identifying potential. Yes, potential causes for observe patterns, of course. relating assessment result to instructional practices. So that is one of the most important thing that we need to consider in that kind of assessment of learning. So using assessment data to adjust teaching strategies. Of course, as a teacher, we need to have a good strategies in order to have a good communication topic, and also the curriculum. So providing a targeted intervention for struggling students. Of course, we need to have that kind of strategies, differentiating instruction to meet the needs of all learners. Yes, as a teacher, it is very important to use differentiated instructions, using data to inform future lesson planning. Yes, of course, as a teacher, we need to that kind. We use that to have a good lesson planning. Students' reflection. Yes, as a students' reflection, enabling students to reflect on their own performance and identifying areas for growth. Fostering a growth mindset. Of course, as a teacher, as the students, we need to have that kind of growth mindset for the harmonious relationship towards the students and um, 1.2 comprehend and apply basic concepts of statistics in educational assessment and evaluation. So in 1.5, in the competencies of assessment of learning and basic statistical concepts are essential for making a sense of assessment data. So this include measures of central tendency, so or mean average. So provides a general sense of overall performance of the students. Mean, when we see mean, median, middle value. So when we say middle value, it is useful for understanding typical performance of the students. So especially when there are outliers. Let's move on to mode. So most frequent value. So when we say most frequent value, it's repeated, indicates common performance levels. Yes, of course. Measures of variability. So it is where we can get that deviation. Indicates how spread out the scores are example range shows the difference between the highest and the lowest lowest scores. The distribution, so understanding normal distributions of and how scores and deviate from the norm. So that's the keys of that assessment. So recognizing squid distribution and their implications. So of course that is the assessment for that kind of statistics. Basic correlation or understanding how two sets of data relate to one another. Statistical or significance, so basic and understanding that some students are more meaningful than others. So that is the 1.5. And now let's move on to 1.6. So 1.6, it is demonstrate knowledge of providing timely, accurate, and constructive feedback to learners and parents. So, in other words, it is the effective feedback is crucial. So, effective feedback is crucial for students. Why? Because students' learning and engagement. It should be timely. When we say timely, provide as soon as possible. So after the assessment as a teacher, it is very common, a very crucial way of feedbacking. It allows students to make timely adjustment for their learning. Of course, it is crucial for that feedbacking for the good, accurate or based and clear and objective criteria. Of course, it was right. So focuses on specific strength and weaknesses. Yes, as I mentioned earlier, strength and weaknesses of the assessment we use in assessment. So constructive. So provide specific suggestions for improvement. So focuses on the learning process, not just the outcome, uses positive and encouraging language. Of course, as a teacher, it is very crucial to have a positive and encouraging language towards for our students. Specific. We need to be specific. Avoid vague and statements. So refer to specific example from the student's work. Understandable. We need to be understandable. So we need to use language that is appropriate for the learner's age. So when we assign for grade 1 or grades 1 through 3, we need to have a learner's age and understanding. So actionable. So we need to give students concrete steps they can take to improve. Yes, of course, that's the improvement to improve the students' work. For parents, communicate clearly and respectfully. Yes. To have a good harmonious relationship towards the students, the parents, and the teacher. Provide information about your child's progress and how they can support their learning at school and at home. Be ready to answer questions. So by mastering these skills, we, the teacher, the educators, can create a more effective and supportive learning environment for all the students. Thank you, and God bless us all.